Good afternoon and welcome to today's Licensing Subcommittee. I'm Councillor Scott Pater-Harris. Before we start, we have to do an election of chair. I'm going to hand over to our legal advisor, Ben Attrell, who will call for a nomination and a seconder.
Any nominations?
I nominate Councillor Pater-Harris.
That's seconded, that's unanimous. So obviously, as I said, I'm Councillor Scott Pater-Harris. Just going to do some housekeeping first. If the continuous fire alarm sounds, please evacuate the room and the public gallery by the stairwells. Do not attempt to use the lifts. Please assemble at the Queen Victoria statue in front of the civic offices. In order to comply with the Guildhall Trust fire marshal regulations, anyone who signed in to the Guildhall reception desk should sign out when leaving the building at the end of today's meeting. Please can everyone use their microphones and remember to switch them off when they have finished. So obviously just press the red button, the light will come on, and obviously use your microphone. Is that understood? Thank you. Do we have any apologies? No apologies, that's fine. Any interest, members?
None from me, Chair.
No interest. Okay, we'll move on to... Oh no, I need to do introductions, sorry. So obviously, as I said, I'm Councillor Scott Pater-Harris, I'm chairing. I'm going to go to my left to start.
Dave Ashmore, one of the councillors for Fratton Ward.
I'm Councillor Daniel Weems for Hillsey Ward.
Okay.
My name is Ben Attrell. I'm a solicitor employed by the council and I'll be advising the subcommittee whilst they make their decision today.
Good afternoon, Derek Stone, Principal Licensing Officer.
John Walsgrove, solicitor for the Deco.
Matthew Becker, I'm the licensee and owner of the Deco.
And I'm Matthew Bryden, I'm the manager at the Deco.
Jacqueline Ford, a resident near the Deco.
Thank you. So as we move on to, which is item 5 of our agenda, which is 5 Licensing Act 2003, application for variation of a premises licence, which is Deco 128 Elm Grove, Southsea. So obviously the purpose of the report is for the committee to consider an application for the variation of a premises licence pursuant to section 35 of the Licensing Act. I'm going to hand over to our licensing manager, who will obviously introduce that, present the relevant facts and explain their recommendation if they have one.
Yes, good afternoon, members. So this hearing today, as you said, is to consider a variation to the Deco premises licence at 128 Elm Grove, Southsea. The application is seeking to extend the sale of alcohol, which currently is on a Monday to Sunday from 9 o'clock in the morning to midnight, to Sunday to Thursday, 9 o'clock in the morning until 1 o'clock, and then on Fridays and Saturdays from 9 o'clock until 3 o'clock in the morning. An extension to the late night refreshment provision, currently Monday to Sunday, 2200 to 0100 hours, and this is going to be extended, if it's approved, to 0300 hours on a Friday and Saturday. And an extension to the opening hours, currently Monday to Sunday, it's 8 o'clock till 1 o'clock, and it hopefully would change, if approved, to Sunday to Thursday, 8 o'clock to 1:30 in the morning, and then on a Friday and Saturday from 8 o'clock until 3:30 in the morning. Additionally, the seasonal variation will extend until 03:30 on bank holiday Sundays. 4 of the existing licensing conditions are to be removed, and a change to the SA licensed all staff on Fridays and Saturdays to cover the extended hours, plus the introduction of an ID scanner from 2100 hours on Fridays and Saturdays. So this condition has been agreed in consultation with the police prior to the application being submitted. Additionally, members, I believe that there were 4 temporary event notices issued prior to the submission of this event, which I'm sure Mr. Walsgrove will discuss with you, just to test the waters to see how it worked. So the matter has been referred to the committee for determination following receipt of relevant representations from other persons, namely residents in close proximity to the venue. There were 10 objection representations, and we received 4 in support of the application. The applicant has detailed in the operating schedule the steps intended to support and promote the licensing objectives, and these can be found in the redacted application form attached at Appendix A. The current licence is attached at Appendix B. Public notice has been given by way of a press notice, a premises notice, and local ward councillors were notified of the application, so there are no grounds for the committee to reject the application for non-compliance with prescribed advertising requirements. The pub has traded as Deco since October 2005 under its present owner. The pub originally traded as the Elms and was constructed in 1936, replacing an earlier tavern of the same name that existed since at least the mid-19th century. In July 2006, a licensing subcommittee approved a variation to the premises licence to extend its hours of operation to the current permitted hours. There have been no representations from any of the responsible authorities. Relevant representations have been received from Councillor Smith, local ward councillor, concerning the potential for noise and a suggested 1 o'clock closure time. Some local residents have described the late hour applied for as likely to cause a general noise nuisance in the area and make reference to general noise nuisance and antisocial behaviour emanating in general within this area of Southsea, with a few representations specifically mentioning smokers outside Deco and the noise from motorcycles starting up and leaving at closing time. As I said, there are 4 support representations, 2 from residents in very close proximity to the premises, and all those representations are attached at Appendix C. Members, I've set out in my report the policy and statutory considerations, the main ones being the promotion of the licensing objectives, which, as you know, are the prevention of crime and disorder, public safety, prevention of public nuisance, and the protection of children from harm. Paragraph 10.14 of the statutory guidance says that where there are objections to an application to extend the hours during which licensable activities are to be carried on, and the licensing authority determines that this would undermine the licensing objectives, it may reject the application or grant it with appropriate conditions and or different hours from those requested. Members, finally, I'll remind you of the review provisions contained in Chapter 11 that states that proceedings set out in the 2003 Act for reviewing premises licence represent a key protection for the community where problems associated with the licensing objectives occur after the grant or variation of a premises. At any stage following the grant of a premises licence, a responsible authority or any other person may ask the licensing authority to review the licence because of a matter arising at the premises in connection with any of the 4 licensing objectives. I don't think I need to say any more at this stage, members, but obviously I shall be here throughout the proceedings to assist you where I can. Thank you.
Thank you very much, Derek. Do we have any questions for the licensing officer? Councillor Williams?
In terms of antisocial behaviour, how many incidences have there been, logged in any system we hold?
Specifically to the Deco,
Yeah.
I have none that I can tell you about, not specifically to those premises.
And within the immediate area next to the Deco pub, is there anything?
There is a premises next door to Deco, which has seen some antisocial behaviour, but it's not connected to the premises itself.
Okay, and then I just have one follow-up question. I'm just reading through the deputations again, and there's a lot of issues with noise pollution being the biggest one, and then the second seems to be a lot of problems with debris and bottles and things. How often is this area kind of inspected for maybe like glass bottles and other such things? That
I wouldn't have that information, I'm sorry, can't help you.
No problem. That's it, thank you.
Do you have any questions, Councillor Ashmore? No. It's just, I'm just going to raise the issue of noise pollution, because I think that's something that's come up quite a lot during the representations we've got. And you say there's no representation from a responsible authority at all.
That's correct. They're not. I have checked with them. They didn't make a representation, obviously. They were notified about it, so they obviously didn't have any concerns. The last complaint they said they had in relation specifically to the premises was in March this year, and that was around noisy and rowdy customers, and I believe the premises were sent a letter just to give advice.
Okay, thank you. And just one more, I mean, obviously as a licensing officer, is this a premises that you've inspected recently?
It's premises that we visit periodically. The DPS will come to the pub watch meetings, and I would say it's a well-run establishment.
Thank you. Do you have any more questions, members? Councillor Williams.
Just a quick one relating to the relationship with the police. Has the police ever been called to this area, and have they given any advice saying it's a good, well-managed pub at all?
Prior to the application being submitted, the police were consulted, as with the licensing authority, and we had no concerns to the application being submitted, and they did do it, as I said, a couple of test events just to test the waters.
Okay, cool. Thank you.
Any more questions, members? No? Thank you. We'll move on. Mr. Walsgrove, do you have any questions?
No questions, thanks, Chair.
I've got a big list today. Over to yourself, Mr. Walsgrove, to present the case.
Sorry, Chair, did you just want to check that the residents don't have any questions?
Oh, sorry, yeah, absolutely. Do you have any questions for the licensing officer? Sorry.
Whether it's actually a question or not, I know the police were contacted, literally not this weekend, just gone the weekend before, about noise outside the pub. And I know of a couple of incidents where neighbours have contacted the police. I don't know how that specifically gets logged, but I wouldn't want it to be viewed that none of us have ever raised our hands about problems with noise, because we have.
Okay.
Thank you.
All I can say is I think the issue probably is with the premises next door as opposed to the premises actually Deco itself.
Okay. Do you have any more questions? Okay. Thank you. Mr. Walsgrove, it's over to you to present your case.
Thank you, Chair. Just in relation to our representations in support of the application, I'll just split it into four parts. First, just run through the application. I know Mr. Stone has briefed you on what the application is about. I just need to address you a little on the conditions that we're asking to be removed and why we're asking those to be removed. Then I'll just move on to the background and history of the Deco, just to give you a flavour of the premises, its nature and character, the type of customers that are going there. Thirdly, move on to some specific comments about the residents' concerns they've expressed. And lastly, wrap up the representations with what we say are the reasons why you can grant this application as applied for, ensuring that the licensing objectives have been promoted. So just turning to the application itself, Mr. Stone has run through the hours changes that we've applied for, so I'm not going to repeat those. I'll move straight on to the conditions that we've asked to be removed. And so that's conditions 1, 6, 11 and 13. You've got the existing premises licence in your pack, and so you can refer to those as I'm speaking. I'll just find you the page number. So it's the Annex 2 conditions starting on page 31 of your agenda. So the first condition we're asking to be removed is number 1. That is a historic condition that when the law changed and the local authority became the keepers of all the licences rather than the magistrates' court, the police officer at the time, this was one of his favoured conditions that he asked pretty much every licence holder in Portsmouth to add, which was this sort of hour wind down period. But in reality that condition doesn't work, because it says there about having a dynamic management system, so that even when you choose to close your venue earlier, you've still got to have this hour wind down period, which means you've got to have staff retained working on the premises for an hour, not being able to serve anybody drinks other than soft drinks. You're probably more familiar with a drinking up provision of, say, 30 minutes, and under the old law it used to be a 20-minute drinking up time. So where this hour came from, I don't really know, other than it was a specific request from that particular police licensing officer, which is no longer ever asked for on any licence, whether it's a new licence or variation. It is impracticable. It should be down to the licence holder to choose when he closes and how he deals with that wind down period. And you've seen, if you grant the variation today in terms of the hours for the sale of alcohol, there is that 30 minutes of drinking up time. And clearly, if whatever hours you decide to grant, or if you left the licence exactly as it is now, then it would be down to the licence holder to control that period of time. It doesn't need that condition. We say it's onerous and unnecessary, and so we ask you to remove it, believing it has no impact on the licensing objectives whatsoever if you do remove it. Conditions 6 and 11, which are on page 32, these are conditions which simply set out statutory obligations and therefore they are effectively duplicating existing statutory measures. So in terms of risk assessments, those that you would need to do under the Health and Safety at Work Act, for example. And the Section 182 guidance issued by the Secretary of State under the Licensing Act says you shouldn't impose conditions which merely duplicate existing statutory responsibilities. So we say, first of all, they're vague and unenforceable, and B, in any event, all they're doing is saying you should comply with the law, which they have to do anyway. So to it's a tidying up exercise. We'd ask you to remove those conditions because we just think they're redundant in any event because of obligations which exist in the statutes that those two conditions refer to. And then the last one is condition 13 on page 33, which is a very old condition, and this, I believe, would have been one grandfathered over when the licence was put from the magistrates over to the local authority, where historically, unfortunately the current owner can't confirm, but there must have been a separate shop attached to this premises where off sales were made, which is very, very old fashioned. Certainly when I started licensing, a lot of pubs had off sales departments on them. I mean, they're completely a thing of the past now. Whenever the plan for the deco changed, that condition should have been removed because it's redundant. They haven't got an off-sales department, and in fact they don't let people take alcohol away from the premises, which also addresses one of the concerns in the residents' letter about bottles and glasses, etc., outside the premises. No one's allowed to take anything away. So I asked for that to be removed because it doesn't make sense. There isn't an off-sales department. There's no plan which refers to it. And so again, that's a historical condition which is now entirely redundant, and anybody looking at that licence could not make sense of it. So we ask you to remove it. And then lastly, in terms of the application, we're asking you to add 2 brand new conditions. So the one for SIA door staff to be at the premises is actually a new condition. It's not required currently, although SIA have been employed on a voluntary basis by the owner on a Friday and Saturday night, because those are, in his judgment, the 2 evenings where you would need to have SIA security on, even with his current hours until midnight. So with these new conditions for the door staff and the ID scan, what I would say is if you refuse to extend the hours, then I would ask you not to impose those 2 new conditions, because ultimately the licence would end up in a worse place than it is now. You should trust him to carry on running the place exactly as it is, without any concerns from responsible authorities and without any complaints from the neighbours. So I'd ask you to bear that in mind. If you choose not to vary the hours, then please don't add those 2 conditions, because anyone applying for a variation should not end up in a worse position than when they started. I think that's fair to say. So just moving on to the deco itself and a bit of background and history to it. As you've heard in your report, Mr. Becker purchased the premises, the freehold, back in 2005. So very long-standing licence holder, 17 years and going. And I think the best way of summing up what this venue is all about is actually quoting some of the residents who wrote in support of this variation. So specifically quoting from them, it's described as family friendly. It brings the residents together in a place they feel comfortable. It's always been a safe space. There's no antisocial behaviour. There's no noise issues. It's got character and charm. And Mr. Becker would tell you that all of the customers that frequent the deco are almost exclusively all local residents. Yes, some of those will be students who come to Portsmouth for their 3 or 4 years while they're studying, but they are living locally in student accommodation. And he has quite a mix of customers in terms of age groups. So it does attract the students from the university. You will have seen that it's described as an alternative venue to more of the mainstream venues in terms of the music that might be offered, but also the clientele that go there. So a mix of those students of that category, for want of a better word, but also the local residents who use it are sort of in the 30 plus, right the way up to whatever age you can think of, the 60s, 70s, 80s. And certainly when I've visited the premises in late afternoon, early evening, the customers that I've seen in there are, in their 60s plus. It's definitely not a premises which targets the sort of 18 to 25-year-olds who are using the one-eyed dog and the fat fox primarily. And those premises, you will have seen in the report, they had their hours varied to the same hours that we are applying for, but they attract a different crowd. That said, Mr. Becker has told me that when those pubs extended their hours, the people using the Deco on a Friday and Saturday evening in particular, come midnight when he has to effectively close and take last orders, he said about 2/3 of his customers are then moving on to either the one-eyed dog or the fat fox, even though they're not really venues that they would ordinarily go to. And they're doing that because they want to extend their night out. About 1/3 of his customers, he says, go home at the close at 12:30, and only a handful of those would order a taxi home, because he said obviously they're local residents, the vast majority of his customers walk to these premises. But what he does have on a busy Saturday night, he can get between 100 and 150 people enjoying themselves at the Deco, about 2/3 of which at midnight are all leaving and then going to one of those other two venues. I think Huey's as well has also got a late night licence nearby. And so his intention is obviously to allow his customers who enjoy his style of venue to spend their evening with him and not have that transience come midnight of anywhere between 70 and 100 people moving to one of the other venues, which should ease the strain on those two venues as well, where occasionally it has been known that people have to queue outside waiting to get in. And essentially, he would say, in doing that, it should improve any issues of noise or antisocial behaviour, because people will come to a venue, stay at the one venue all evening, and then between 12 and 3, should you grant the Friday and Saturday till 3, there would be a gradual disbursement. So whereas you've got everybody coming out at the same time, you would have a gradual disbursement from 12 till 3. It's not going to be a situation where you've got 100 people left at 3 o'clock in the morning. And again, with that gradual dispersal, there is likely, we say, to be much less issues of noise from people leaving the venue as there may be currently. As far as the residents' representations are concerned, as you've already identified, two key issues, the antisocial behaviour and the potential noise. So Mr. Becker's case would be that in the 17 years that he has owned it, there haven't been issues of antisocial behaviour that should cause the residents concerns. He's not saying that he hasn't had incidents on rare occasions that have to be dealt with, because every licensed premises that serves alcohol at some point will have that rogue customer come into the premises who misbehaves themselves. But as you've heard, with the condition of having SIA staff on, which he does voluntarily, but we're asking you to impose a condition, there is minimal risk that that would be a regular occurrence, as is suggested by local residents. But what we ask you to attach the greatest weight to are two key facts. First of all, we consulted with the police before we even considered putting this application in, which included a consultation with the licensing authority, and we wanted to hear their side and whether they would have concerns and whether they had anything in their history. I do that because, as an experienced licensing solicitor in this city, it's not always the case that when the police log incidents that they let the licensee know that those incidents are being recorded. So it's important to have that discussion to understand, have they had numerous incidents flagged up which perhaps haven't been drawn to the attention of the licence holder. because the last thing we wanted to do is put an application in that the police would say, well, we're going to object and here's 20 things that have happened in the last 12 months that we're unhappy about. So we all met with Acting Sergeant Rackham and Mr Stone to discuss the application, what background they may have. And it was evident that the police had no issues of concern other than some antisocial behaviour from the residents of the premises next door to the Deco, the Kingsway, which my client has in fact been working with the police, providing them with CCTV evidence of what the residents of that accommodation have been doing. And in fact, my client was, along with the residents, complaining about what, in particular, two of the individuals who were resident there were getting up to locally. Sergeant Rackham told us that those two particular individuals who seemed to be the root cause of most of what was happening in the vicinity had been moved on, and since then those issues have gone away. And certainly Sergeant Rackham said that the police had absolutely no concerns with the premises opening up later for the hours that we've applied for, and of course they've not objected. It was his suggestion to formalise the voluntary employment of SIA supervisors with a condition only required on Friday and Saturday night, and also, as I'm sure you're familiar with numerous applications you've dealt with over the last probably 12 months, the police very much favour the ID scan, which acts as a deterrent for, as I've said, those one or two rogue people who decide to ruin everybody else's night out by causing trouble. The ID scan is a deterrent for those people because, of course, they are then easily identified as to who they are, where they can be contacted. And the client's more than happy to offer that as a condition, which is, we say, a huge deterrent to minimise any possible risk of those isolated incidents that may have happened in the past. So the second point that I put forward in support is the fact that in the discussions with Acting Sergeant Rackham, I had said that the client would trial later hours on a Friday and Saturday night with some temporary event notices, because it is, I can understand the residents expressing some concern as to what might happen, because nobody can really gaze into a crystal ball. We'd had Acting Sergeant Rackham's view that he felt it wouldn't have any negative impact. We wanted to see that for ourselves and also trial having those later hours with the staff, the SIA staff, to see how things would occur. So initially we had an extension, as every licensed premises did, for the Jubilee weekend on the Thursday, Friday and Saturday, where nationally the hours were extended to 1 o'clock. So that was an hour's extra extension, passed without any incidents at all, quite happily. And then temporary event notices were submitted for Friday and Saturday, 18th and 19th and 25th and 26th of June, and then again for the 2nd and 3rd of July and 9th of 10th of July. So 8 nights until 3 a.m. closing at 3:30. And again, all of the residents' representations were written after those had taken place, and not one of them refers to incidents that happened across any of those weekends. And certainly in my instructions from Mr Becker was that no complaints were received at the premises, either from responsible authorities or indeed local residents, and that all of those weekends passed without any issues whatsoever. So matters raised by residents about people not dispersing and not being dispersed properly by the SIA staff, that didn't happen. It was managed effectively by Matthew, the DPS, alongside the SIA. People had a lovely night out at the Deco, didn't have to move on to one of the other premises that I've mentioned, enjoyed their evening there. There was that gradual disbursement over that period of time between midnight and 3, and as far as the premises are concerned, it caused no issues at all. And I'm sure, had there been issues at the Deco for those extended hours, then residents would have referred to it in their letters of representation, but they haven't. So we say there is credible evidence before you. It's not a case of crystal ball gazing in relation to this variation, because we've tried and tested it and we consulted with the police beforehand. We've been working with the police in dealing with some antisocial behaviour which had nothing to do with the deco, which has resolved itself, and therefore in granting the variation, we say the licensing objective of the prevention of crime and disorder is promoted with the conditions we've offered, and there will be no adverse impact. The second aspect of the residents' concerns is about noise, and that's noise of people and noise of music. There has never been an issue as far as the deco are concerned from environmental health about the noise of music at the premises, and it's true to say, I believe, someone will correct me if I'm wrong, but in the letters of representation no one has mentioned music noise at the premises causing a nuisance. So in terms of the music side of things, environmental health have raised no concerns. It's been managed properly. We had music across all of those weekends that I've mentioned without any complaints from anybody, and no one's raised any complaints in their letters of objection about noisy music. So that's one aspect. The second point is about noisy people outside. So quite some years ago, 7-8 years ago, the deco did have an outside area, garden area, to the rear, and that did cause some issues where local residents were complaining about the noise of people outside the premises, and there was some consultation with environmental health about how many people were outside in that effective garden area. So Matthew took the decision to close that area where people were allowed to take their drinks outside, and to not have an outside area. And so it is true that people who wish to smoke now have to exit the premises and stand outside the premises, but they are not permitted to take any drinks with them. They are only permitted to go outside and smoke. Now, fortunately, in this day and age, the number of people who smoke is significantly reduced and is reducing yet further. And the owner and DPS of the deco would take issue with the fact that large groups of people congregate outside. They say they don't. They will get a handful of people outside who go out for a cigarette, whatever, or vape, whatever it is they're doing, and then they go back inside the premises. They're not outside drinking. They're not spending a long time outside. And in any event, on a Friday and Saturday, you've got that door supervision. They say there isn't a high level of noise from those handful of customers that are outside smoking. They've never received any complaints from local residents, and they've never had any further communication from environmental health, having worked with them and in fact closing an outside area that they could have used where people could have taken their drinks outside. So positive action taken. There is positive management around the people that do choose to smoke, but we say there isn't actually an issue there to be dealt with. Just moving on to one point that I think three of the residents have raised about the advertising and notice about this application. Obviously you heard from your licensing officer that it was properly advertised. I make the point, it's not a major point, but if you look at someone raising the issue about whether we've lawfully complied with the legislation, saying we haven't, when in fact we have, you do have to question the credibility of what else is said by those persons, because if they're saying we've effectively not done what we're supposed to do when we have, then clearly that must raise a question over anything else they've said as to whether that should hold with you any sort of credibility. So summing up, and moving on to the last of the 4 points I wanted to make as to why I say you can grant this application. Primarily, I'm asking you to attach weight to the fact that the police and environmental health have been consulted on this application. They have no concerns regarding antisocial behaviour or noise. You will know, but I say it for the benefit of the residents that are here, that the Section 182 guidance is issued by the Secretary of State under the Act makes it quite clear that a licensing subcommittee, when making a decision, should attach weight and should look to the police as the experts in relation to crime and disorder, and also in relation to other responsible authorities in their area of expertise, i.e. environmental health on noise issues. So I ask you to attach weight to the fact that they're both happy and haven't raised concerns. Second point is, we've proved we can do it. So 5 extensions of over 5 weekends without, as far as we were concerned, any complaints. And no concerns raised from environmental health or the police. Third point, Mr. Becker's been running this premises for 17 years as a responsible licence holder. That's a long time for someone to have a single premises. He's here for the long term, so, you know, however many more years he's got to go, he is here to stay. This isn't a temporary position where someone might be trying to make a fast buck, make some money and then leave. We say you can put your trust in him because he is a long-term licence holder. He's not going to risk his licence by extending his hours when he's already got a successful business there. Of course it's a commercial decision to extend the hours. It always is. People might come to you and say, we're doing it for the benefit of the customers. And certainly the customers have been saying, how on earth are you only open until 12 when we can go to the one-eyed dog or the fat fox until 3? Can't we stay here later? So he has had those conversations with customers, but ultimately it's a commercial decision. Yes, it's going to make him more money if he stays open later. But that said, he is a responsible licence holder with a proven track record, and he went about this the right way, which I say demonstrates his commitment to running a responsible premises. He didn't just put an application in, he went to the police first, went to the licensing authority first, found out the right information, then he tested it with temporary event notices, then he took the decision, yes, this is going to work, it's not going to risk my licence, we can do this without a negative impact on the licensing objectives. Fourth point, as I've said, I think the longer licensing hours, we say there will be a gradual disbursement of the customers of this particular venue. There will be that lack of any transient customer base moving to other licensed premises. We say that will have a benefit on the local community, not an adverse effect. It will, in fact, be quieter, if you like, having people leaving in small numbers across that period of time, rather than the current situation where at the moment at 12 o'clock 2/3 go to the one-eyed dog or the fat fox, and then they are over capacity at those 2 venues, and then they have issues where the residents are saying, well, there are some noise issues with people walking through the streets. Well, that's not from our venue, because those other 2 are working much later. We say there is a benefit there. And lastly, but not least, there is a power to review the licence. So although I've said in this case we don't need to crystal ball gaze, which in other cases you would have to do, even so, if what the residents say might happen does happen, they can bring it back to you very quickly with a review application. And my submission is that allows you to apply a light touch to this application. That's what the government had intended when they first introduced this legislation. Responsible operators should be given the freedom to operate their premises and businesses as they choose, with hours that don't have any negative impact, with that overriding provision that if they cause issues, the licence can come straight back to you and be reviewed, where the hours can be cut back, or even more stringent matters could be imposed. So on that basis, I ask you to grant the application as we've applied for, and of course I can answer any questions arising from those representations. Thank you, councillors.
Thank you, Mr. Walsgrove. Do we have any questions, members?
Not yet, no.
Councillor Williams?
I only really have one, actually, and it relates to the disbursement part you've mentioned. Well, I understand that the Deco runs a lot of gigs occasionally, is that correct?
So in terms of live music, it would be approximately once a month that they'd have live music at the venue. Otherwise, it's recorded music through the house.
I wouldn't
system.
really say this is a question then, it's more just a comment leading on from that. I'd say the only time I would recognise that worry about the disbursement being all in one go would be a gig or a live music event where the entertainment finishes and then people leave. But in other areas of like live music, in other areas of the deco, I can kind of agree with what you're talking about, that people leave in disbursement. So that was really my only question. I just wanted to know how many live music events you have.
And just to add, as I said, the intention is once a month, and that live music would finish at 11, because, as Mr. Becker would tell you, obviously with having live music and people's adrenaline levels when they attend a gig, if you finish the live music and then put them all out on the street, they're going to be hyped up and likely to make a noise. So at the moment it finishes at 11 and then he would shut at 12:30, so that's an hour and a half. But if you extended the hours, he's not going to be extending the time of the gig, so live music would still finish at 11.
Any questions, Councillor Ashmore?
I'm not following from that, no.
No, it's just a question from me then, Mr. Walsgrove. I'm looking at the representations and you made reference to there was no complaints about music, but there has been significant complaints around noise and people congregating, obviously within the representation. So I just want to know if there's anything that the DECO is going to be doing to mitigate those issues that have been raised by residents in their representations.
Yeah, so we don't accept that that's an issue locally. So I know people have asserted that there is noise caused by their customers, but as far as the management is concerned, that isn't the case. Had it been the case, and they have had a number of visits from the police, just routine inspections, the police would have raised it when we met them, and certainly from notes of the meeting, I think Sergeant Rackham had been to the premises the week before we actually met him, and he said, he attended at around 11 p.m. A, couldn't hear music, the recorded music that was on, and B, had no issues with customers outside. So we say there isn't a problem. I know the residents are saying there is, but we're saying there isn't. And if there was, Environmental Health would have been contacting us saying there are issues with noise outside.
I was just actually going to come on to that, and that's quite interesting that you make the point regarding environmental health, because we don't have a representation today, which I'm kind of surprised by that, because the amount of representations which do talk about noise, which is obviously coming on to the prevention of public nuisance. So I'm quite surprised we don't have that, and I think we'll hear it more when we hear representations shortly. So I'm not going to ask anything else at this point. Do you have anything, Councillor Ashmore, you want to add?
Just a comment really about the noise. I don't know you've Mr. Walsgrove said that your opinion differs, or the venue opinion differs, other than the residents. But I think residents do tend to know more what's going on. And as far as the lack of representation from environmental health and the police, it's not saying that any noise will be above a kind of level where it needs enforceable, but obviously opening late will increase general chatter or the sound of the place going on, so there will be noise. It might just not be, beyond something that needs enforcing. So I don't think it's a case of the residents just making it up, but there will be extra noises. I think that's a valid concern, is all I'd say.
Which is obviously, it's a matter for you on what you hear. Obviously 4 local residents wrote in saying there aren't any issues. So you've got 10 residents saying that there are some issues, 4 residents saying there aren't issues, and that's why I'm saying you should attach greater weight to what Environmental Health say. They haven't objected. If they had concerns about noise of people outside, they would have objected. I know that because on other applications I've dealt with, they have objected for that reason. They haven't here.
Yeah, I think Councillor Ashmore makes a point about that obviously residents do have a feeling that there is noise associated with the premises, and I think that's probably a long-standing a long-standing belief as well that has been coming, that what I can read from coming from the deputations anyway. I don't have any more further questions, members. No. Okay. Do you have any questions as the licensing officer? No. Do you have any questions? No. We don't have Councillor Smythe here, do we?
No, but we do have Mr Ahmed, who's also arrived a little bit late, and he wishes to speak.
Okay. Do you wish to just, when we come over to you, I'll put you in to speak, all right? Do you want to just introduce yourself? Can you press the red button? Yeah, you've made a representation, haven't you, via the already? You're the chap that hand wrote it and sent it in. Do you have any questions for Mr. Walsgrove? Okay, that's fine. We'll move on, but we'll come back to you shortly.
Chair.
Okay.
Can I quickly go and call my solicitor for 2 seconds? So can we have like a 5-minute comfort break, if that's okay?
2 seconds. Can we just get past the objectors
Yeah,
and
of
go
course,
to a
yeah.
break, please? Thank you. It's not appropriate to do a break yet. So I'm just going to pass over to the...
So I was just going to ask, is that in relation to this particular meeting, or is this an external factor?
It's an external
Okay. Thank you.
No. I'm going to hand over to Mrs. Ford to give her representation.
Thank you. I think, first of all, I'd like to say that I'm speaking for a group of neighbours from Albany Road, because obviously a number of us have been speaking about this over the last couple of weeks since we found out, only thanks to Mr. Ahmed having visited a local councillor. I think one of the things that we want to say is, as a group of neighbours, we have no issue with the pub. The pub, as has been explained, is managed well. We have no issues with that. The issues that we have predominantly are around, as has been said, noise and antisocial behaviour. And I'm sure Mr. Ahmed will say a lot, as I will do, about the people that do congregate outside the pub. I think one of our neighbours at one point has counted 30 plus people stood outside the pub on both sides of Albany Road. And I'm sure the pub does its utmost to stop people taking drinks out of the pub. But as we know, if people have an intention in mind, especially with a couple of drinks inside them, you know, it not being obvious that they've carried a bottle outside, I'm sure takes place, because at times you will see a number of bottles outside the pub in Albany Road on a Saturday or a Sunday morning. The antisocial behaviour we are very concerned about, and I know this is no fault of the pub that we are now positioned with Kingsway House and the old library, but there are a number of problems coming from both of those outlets, and we're just concerned that with an extended opening hours, even though there might be the extra security on, even though they might not enter the pub, the people from those establishments are known to fight, are known to take drugs, are known to meet with drug dealers in and around.
Ms. Ford, can I just clarify, obviously, that's not in any of the representations, and I've got to be very careful that I can only take what's admissible. It's been on representation. We haven't had any reference to any drug taking at all.
Okay,
so
fine.
can we just strictly remove that? Thank you.
Okay. So I think the fact that those people are living in that area now, or residing there, or meeting there, coupled with this, has caused extra concern for us as neighbours that these people, there will be people there to far later times at night, and the likelihood for, in wants of better terms, something to kick off, are concerned, are raised, and a number of the residents have mentioned an increase of feeling unsafe in the area because of some of the things that has gone on. I'd like to say that the fact that one of the representations said that they didn't feel that all the conditions of changing the licence had been followed, they said that in good faith because they felt that they had gone back through the newspaper and hadn't been able to see anything. I affirmed that the licensing officer mentioned that all those things had been taken. I don't think in any way that that should conclude that because that person stated to the best of their ability that that's what they thought, that you should not trust the other comments that we have put forward, because we live there. You know, I have lived there over 30 years. When I moved there, the pub was there, and that was absolutely fine. If you live in the city, there will be a certain degree of noise, but one would think that after midnight, that noise would always abate. I don't know whether people will or how you can tell that 2/3 of people moved to the Fat Fox and the One-Eyed Dog, but we're expecting more noise. The other thing is with the people going to the pub are only local residents. We do get on a number of occasions a number of motorcycles turning up, and the noise from that as they lead, and I'm sure Mr. Ahmad, because it's outside his window, will possibly also talk about that. The other thing, the two final points, is that we were concerned that the pub didn't make any efforts to consult with us as neighbours, and I think if we had have been, we would have felt more included in the process and possibly less likely to object to it, because it's talked about being a community pub, and I'm sure people from the community go there, but then if you are a community pub, talk to your community. And the final point, you know, that we are supported by local councillors. Another resident and myself met with Judith Smythe on Saturday morning. I know she's unable to attend today, but she was very vocal in the fact that she believes that the current licensing is sufficient. Okay.
Thank you for that, Mrs. Ford. Mr. Ahmed, do you want to give your representation? Yeah, with the greatest respect, Mr. Ahmed, that's not really relevant to today's proceedings. So I'll ask members to place sufficient weight to that. Yeah, Mr. Ahmed, that's not relevant to today's proceedings. It's not in any of the representations, and we can't have new evidence presented to us on the day of the actual hearing, and that would be improper to allow that, I'm afraid.
Excuse me, I think the matter of urination was mentioned in one of the representations.
That was,
So-
sorry, I thought you said something else about carports and,
No,
okay,
so
carry on,
sorry.
that's fine.
Along that area, it was in, I think,
You are right, it is in the report, Mrs Ford, you are.
could I just finally say one other point that
I will allow that, yeah, that's fine.
That they say that there hasn't been representations. I know of 2 neighbours that have called, and in fact, I've even with the music called the pub once or twice myself. I will accept that when I phoned, they said it will be stopping in half an hour, and it went over a bit of that time, but it did stop. And I also accept that there was music that was played, or I think it was a week or so ago. It was quite loud because it was hot, windows were open, so I think everybody suffered it more, but I'm pleased to say it finished at 10:30, and I do have to accept that if we live in that area next to a pub, they have a licence to play music, I'm fine with that. If it gets excessive, we know now that we have to complain more about it, but I think it's fair to put a balanced position upon how we feel about it as residents, but I think, as you can tell, the majority of us residents do feel an issue with this, and the timing.
No, thank you, Mr Ford. That is all from the objectors. Subcommittee, do you have any questions for the objectors?
It does relate to the car park and the drug dealing. I know.
No, it's not relevant.
Is it not relevant?
No, it's not relevant because it's not in representation. You can't talk about it.
Okay. I'll go with the urinating part then. Do you feel that this is a regular occurrence from patrons of the Deco, or is it a mixture of premises nearby? Or is it, I don't know if you ever see people coming from the Deco directly to this area to urinate, or is it just people in general?
I think it's very difficult to say, isn't it, as a general, unless you're out there constantly viewing the situation, which I'm not. But I know at least on one instance, I've seen somebody come to this car park area, urinate, and then walk back into the pub, which beggars belief to me because they have toilets. So why would they feel that they need to do this outside? I don't hold the pub responsible for that because it's down to that individual that's doing that. But unfortunately, when things are fueled with drink, people don't necessarily always behave normally, do they? That's my view anyway.
Mr. Ahmed, do you have anything on that question? I understand what you're saying, and I agree with the sentiment that it's not very nice at all. But I think the question that was asked, I think Mrs. Ford answered it quite well, is that could you see people directly coming from Deco, committing that act and then going back? Have you seen that on various occasions?
When the red light's on, it's on. Sorry, apologies. Just wanted to...
Okay. Would you say that it could be associated with the other premises nearby as well? Okay, thank you. Do you have any questions, Councillor Ashmore?
Oh,
no. We obviously spoke about noise and the issues with noise, and I think very accepting the fact that you live near a pub, that there is going to be noise, and I think that's a very sensible place to be, because if you buy a house near a pub, I think it's widely accepted, isn't it? What I will say is, have you had much engagement with the premises? Because you made reference that you phoned them and they were going to turn the music off. I mean, how was that?
On that particular occasion when I did that, as I say, the person responded and said it would finish in 30 minutes. I think I was a little annoyed, so I said as long as it's 30 minutes. And 45 minutes later it was still going, so I rang again. And then I think it finished within about 5 or 10 minutes. I think I was just, it really just particularly got to me on that particular occasion. I think that the key point is that there is a level of noise that we get. It does increase at the weekend because I think there are more people frequenting the pub of a weekend, because I guess more people go out at the weekend. And I think our real concern is we know we will accept, and some people find it harder than others, and I understand it depends how close you are to it, that noise is there. It's the fact that the noise will then be in the early hours of the morning up until 3 o'clock in the morning. Now, I've heard that they don't want this sort of winding up time or whatever, so it's likely to stop at 3 o'clock. But, you know, put yourself in your shoes. I think most of us have been tolerant to it. As Mr. Ahmed said, we put up with it. I think it's a case of once it goes into the early hours of that morning, if people want to do that, there are other places to go. And we would just like you to contain it within the areas that it's already in, rather than extend it further.
Okay, thank you. Do you have any other questions, members? No. We have no more questions. I'm going to hand over to the applicant because they may have some questions. Mr. Walsworth, do you have any questions?
Just for Mr. Ahmed, so if I may.
Absolutely.
Can I just clarify, you can see the front door of the Deco from your house?
Mr. Ahmed, make sure the light's on.
And you say you've seen people come out of the pub and then walk to where the car park is and urinate and then go back into the pub?
It was Miss Ford that said that.
Yeah, okay. Just confirm that he said that he'd seen people leave the premises, and you say that was on numerous occasions. You've seen that.
Mr. That's it.
Yes.
Okay, thank you.
Any more questions, Mr. Walsgrove? Okay.
Chair, I just have a couple of questions. I think along the same theme, really trying to drill down for the benefit of the subcommittee, the extent to which the antisocial behaviour, the congregation of groups, the litter, the bottles, and the noise from associated vehicles departing from the premises, including motorbikes, actually relate to the specific premises that we're talking about today. So in relation to the bottles and litter, have you seen people leaving the premises and dropping bottles or dropping litter? Mr. Ahmed first, as your microphone's still on.
Oh, right. Okay. I don't. No, I haven't seen anything. I mean, there is. Yeah, no, I haven't seen it from the pub.
And the congregation of people, I think the car park was mentioned as a place that people congregate. Is that the car park to the premises itself, or is that a car park associated with the student building?
Sorry?
Is it a car park associated with a different building, or for the actual Deco premises?
Sorry, I don't understand your
The
question.
groups of people that are getting together and causing noise and disturbance, you say, is that happening in the car park for the Deco, or is it a car park for some other building?
This is a residence car park where I live, behind.
And have you seen those people coming out of the Deco and going to that particular location? Or is it just a case that you're woken by noise, you open your curtains and look out and you see the people there?
No, I haven't seen it. The congregating, no, I haven't seen it from the pub. No, I haven't followed them around. No.
And same question for lots of the residents' representations mention vehicles, particularly motorbikes, revving their engines once they've left the premises. Have you seen people coming out of the premises and then revving their motorbikes?
Yes.
There's similar questions to yourself.
I, from a litter perspective, or bottles, I have, on occasions, while driving past the pub, actually seen people outside with their bottles, which there is like a telephone cabinet thing, which seems to be a very welcome place for them to put them on top of there or down by the side of there. You know, the litter is a concern. It's not such a concern as the noise and the antisocial behaviour. And I think, you know, as far as the car park is behind a number of houses in Elm Grove, but literally it is right there by where they stand outside the Deco. They do stand outside in Albany Road into Elm Grove. They go almost round the corner of the pub and then across the road as well, which then, especially where this carport thing is, if it does start to rain, they're smokers. They don't obviously like to smoke, but don't like to get wet. So they will often go under the carport area then. And, you know, I have seen them come in and go out because I park my car there as well. And when leaving, you see them. So it's not like it's not been seen that it's happened.
And leaving the premises and starting vehicles, have you witnessed that?
I think even the pub will accept that on certain times groups of motorcycle people come to the pub. They park them all up on the pavement, and yes, I've seen them go in and come out of the pub. It's as simple as that.
Is that a late night disturbance, or is that sort of generally an afternoon? The reason I ask is you would assume that people driving motor vehicles haven't been drinking alcohol.
I think we have to assume that, for sure, but equally I dare say some people can drink soft drinks rather than alcohol.
So you're saying it does happen late in the evening?
Yes, I have definitely heard it well past 11 o'clock at night.
And you've seen them coming from the premises?
Yes.
Thank you, Chair. I don't have any further questions.
Thank you. Do you have any questions as the last? Okay, no question. Would you like to sum up the case?
I've got nothing further to add, Chair. Thank you.
I'm going to hand over to the applicant to sum up.
I don't know whether the residents want to sum up. We would normally go last.
On my sheet it says you'll go next, but that's what it says. Would you like to sum up at all?
I'm sure the solicitor is going to come back and say against some of the things that we've said. I think all I'm going to say, you've got our representations. We've turned up here in person because we do feel that strongly about it. And I'd just like you to take all that we've said on board in what's taking place. Thank you.
And thank you for your attendance today. Mr. Ahmed?
No, I don't think I've got anything further to add.
Thank you for coming along.
Thank you.
Over to you, Mr. Walsgrove, to sum up.
Just picking up on a couple of the points that were raised by residents and then answering questions from your solicitor. I just want to repeat, as Jacqueline said, I probably would do, the premises do dispute what the residents are saying about people congregating. Certainly the urinating, I mean, the management absolutely deny their customers are leaving a premises where there are more than adequate toilet facilities to go and urinate somewhere and either go on their way or even worse, come back into the premises. Why would you go outside to urinate and then go back in? That's just completely nonsensical. What we're not saying is that those things don't happen. They may well happen, but it's not customers of the Deco that are doing that. And you've heard mention about drug deals, drug taking, and as we said to you, a lot of the antisocial behaviour, if not all of it, is from residents of the neighbouring property, and that was identified to us by the police when we met them, that they had concerns about the level of antisocial behaviour from those people, and they know it is being caused by those people. So when complaints are made in that local area about antisocial behaviour, it is people from that address that they have been dealing with. And my client actually assisted with two particular individuals who were causing no end of problems, who are now not resident there. So we're aware that there are some issues locally, but they're not coming from us. And indeed, we don't want those issues locally. It will put off local people coming to our venue if those things are taking place. To say that there are 30-odd people congregating outside and even across the road just simply isn't true. They are not people from the Deco. To say people are taking bottles out of the premises is not true. That does not happen. There may be people on the street drinking from bottles. They are not customers of the Deco. Drinks are not permitted outside. That is managed very well. The customers know they're not allowed to take their drinks outside. It's their venue. You've heard it described about how safe it is. They're not going to spoil it for other people by causing the level of antisocial behaviour which is being alleged. And as I say, you have residents who have written in to say, effectively, that premises is not causing any problems. However, in summing up, I ask you to attach weight to the fact environmental health and the police have not objected. I take on board your comments about local residents knowing better, but I'm afraid my representation has to be that that's not the case. You have to take expert evidence into account, and the police and environmental health are experts. The police, particularly Sergeant Rackham, knows this area extremely well. If the concerns were being caused by Deco's customers, then he would have objected to this application, and he hasn't. So I ask you to grant the application that's been applied for, knowing that you can apply that light touch to the application because the residents can review the licence if they bring to you credible evidence to say the impact of extending the hours has been this, and they've actually got some evidence to support it, which I say, respectfully, they do not have today. So I ask you to grant the application.
Thank you, Mr. Walsgrove. As a committee now, we will go into closed session to make our decision and via deliberation. So we're going to go do that now. So we're going to adjourn, and it is currently 4:15. I don't envision a decision before 5 o'clock. So can you be back here for 5 o'clock? Is that okay? Thank you.
And that's not to say that a decision will be announced at 5 o'clock. It's just
It could be
simply,
later, yeah.
It won't, yeah. So nothing will happen between now and 5 o'clock. So you can go away safe in the knowledge that the subcommittee is not going to reconvene before then.
Absolutely not.
It
And
may
if
take a little longer.
it does go
it may
longer,
not.
we will let you know. leave the building and just literally at 5 o'clock come outside the door, and we'll tell you if we're going to be any longer. Okay, is that all right? Okay, thank you.
Just before you do retire, obviously my clients have got premises to open and to manage, so if they don't come back, I haven't spoken to them yet, but if they don't come back, please don't read any discourtesy into that. I will definitely come back on their behalf, but they may have to disappear back to work.
Thank you. We've obviously reached a subcommittee decision in the matter of the Licensing Act 2003 application for variation of a premises licence, Deco 128 Elm Grove, Southsea. Obviously, all parties shall receive written confirmation of the decision and reasons. The subcommittee has considered very carefully the application for a variation of a premises licence at Deco. It gave due regard to the Licensing Act 2003, the licensing objectives, statutory guidance, and the adopted statement of licensing policy. The subcommittee considered the relevant representations, both written and given at the hearing by all parties. Human rights legislation and public sector equality duty has been borne in mind whilst making the decision. The subcommittee noted the application sought an extension in hours for the sale/supply of alcohol, the provision of late night refreshment, and an extension to opening hours at the premises. There have been representations from residents, a total of 13, with 9 objecting and 4 in support. A local council had also objected to the extension of hours and proposed an earlier terminal hour. Those objecting raised concerns broadly in relation to the licensing objectives of public nuisance and crime and disorder, with issues of concern relating to noise, particularly from motorcycles, groups outside dispersing and or smoking, antisocial behaviour, littering and urinating in public. No formal representations had been made by responsible authorities. In particular, it was noted that neither the police nor environmental health had raised any concern with the application. The subcommittee heard that conditions had been agreed with the police relating to SIA door staff and the use of an ID scanner. After having heard all of the above evidence, the subcommittee determined to grant the proposed application in the terms sought. The reasons. The subcommittee listened very carefully to residents' concerns and has had to balance those concerns against the interests of the business. In doing so, it has had to determine the extent of the impact that the proposed variation might have upon the licensing objectives of prevention of public nuisance and crime and disorder. The subcommittee has had to take into account the fact that no representation has been received from the police or environmental health, and therefore the inference being that their professional expert position is that the proposal is not considered likely to undermine the licensing objectives. Weight has to be attached to that position, as each have considered the lead in their respective fields. Clearly, the premises is located in an area that has issues of late-night antisocial behaviour. However, the subcommittee has had to consider how the premises is currently affecting that position and whether the proposed variation is likely to undermine the licence objectives. The residents have a sincere fear that additional hours will inevitably aggravate the issues of concern. For the premises, the subcommittee heard that the premises is a family-friendly and safe neighbourhood establishment that does not seek to or attract younger groups specifically, but a mix of patrons. At the current terminal hour, a significant number of patrons are forced to leave the premises and migrate to surrounding premises with hours similar to those sought. The intention is to retain those customers and allow them to gradually disperse over the additional hours, which actually serve to reduce the antisocial behaviour of groups moving through the area. The manager has 17 years of experience and can be trusted to continue to run the premises in a way that promotes the business. The premises has actively worked with the police to identify others in the locality that have been causing precisely the behaviour complained of. In addition, the police and licensing authority were consulted and conditions agreed with the police. Temporary events have been run over 8 evenings for the proposed hours and have not resulted in specific complaints. Live music is not intended to extend beyond the current 11 PM cut-off if the hours are granted. Drinks are not permitted to be taken outside the premises, and this is carefully monitored and enforced. Some residents, particularly those living very close to premises, are wholly supportive of the premises and the application. The subcommittee, however, does acknowledge the concerns raised by residents objecting to the proposed hours, and is disappointed to hear that the premises did not engage with the residents better before making the application. The subcommittee recommends that the premises and residents engage in dialogue to address concerns in the future. In the event that the proposed operation of the premises does lead to the issues of concern, residents are strongly advised to report matters to the police and environmental health where appropriate. Residents can very much be assured that there are powers to deal with premises if a licence leads to the licensing objectives being undermined. Not least is the power for residents or responsible authorities to bring review proceedings where steps can be taken to restrict the licence, impose conditions, or in extreme circumstances revoke the licence when evidence shows issues result from licensable activities. Action can also be taken separately by environmental health in relation to statutory noise nuisance if reported. On balance, and given the range of alternative sources of antisocial behaviour, the subcommittee was not satisfied that it would be appropriate to restrict the premises proposed application at this point in time. There is a right of appeal for all parties to the Magistrate Court, and formal notification of the decision will be set out that right in full. Thank you. That concludes today's meeting.